Yeah, that's a wizard. 100%.
Calling the game right now. Dressed like the Michelin Man, ready to get my on.
A really good team that shouldn't have been.
7 different teams won conference championships. U of A not one of them. I just wanted to point
Welcome,
that out.
everybody, to the Sports Experience Podcast. I'm Chris. This is Dom. Just a couple of comics talking sports. Who are we talking about today?
We were talking about Chris Mullin.
Probably the best left-handed shooter of all time.
Yeah, and part of one of the greatest NBA teams ever assembled in the 92 Dream Team.
That's right.
You got to be a pretty good basketball player to find yourself a spot on that roster. So you want to get into him?
Yeah, man.
All
Let's
right.
hear it.
Christopher Paul Mullin, born July 30th, 1963 in Brooklyn, New York, which this guy is New York through and through.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
It was something we were talking about before in the podcast, how it's a little bit sad that he never played for the Knicks.
That would have been so cool.
Yep.
And then he probably would have been like, oh, I have to play for the Nets if he ever had to play for the Nets. Who are in Brooklyn,
so
though,
true.
now, which is so cool.
Yeah, but he probably had that hatred of the Nets in that era. So
It's like South Park. Screw New Jersey.
yes.
Anyway, his dad was a baggage claim terminal handler at, I believe, John F. Kennedy Airport, born to a very big Irish Catholic family.
Yes.
Which will come into play later in his career as far as some of the things that might be holding him back, but didn't eventually do it in the long run. Was a huge, like I said, a huge Knicks fan growing up. Loved the Rolls-Royce backcourt.
Yep.
That of
Walt Frazier and Earl the Pearl.
Oh, yeah.
And his other one that he said was Larry Bird, which everybody, once he gets into the NBA, everybody kind of like is just like, oh, that's a Larry Bird style. Like, I think he was like 2 inches shorter or something like that. But
They played very similar games.
always very compared, very same speed, because they just seemed like a little bit slower than everybody, but still unbelievable offensive weapons.
Chris Mullin is what Adam Morrison might have been.
Oh, that's good.
Like,
yeah.
Maybe not quite Larry Bird, but definitely one of the NBA's greatest players. He wore number 17. I don't know if you saw this for John Havlicek.
Yep, that was the last one that I saw, because he really talks about these 4 guys being the influence on him, and yeah.
Yeah, and he played, basketball is king in New York City at this time. There was a good story that I had saw about him and Ed Pinckney, a guy who played at Villanova and in the NBA. They would go to the Bronx and play pickup basketball. They're like good friends. They would just go around the city just shooting hoops.
Well, that's where the best games were.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure they were ready to find the best games, and then that really develops you into, I imagine, just a great all-around player, because you're playing against so many different players.
And so many different good players.
Yeah.
And I think the thing with Mullin that I find so interesting is he's of the Caucasian persuasion.
Yes.
And he's probably one of the only, if not only, white guys playing in these games. And I'm sure that's toughening him up quite a bit.
Well, I'm sure that these games in the Bronx are predominantly black, like you were saying, and I bet they give him a lot of shit, and then he gets on the court, and they're like, oh, all right, no, he can play. Because that's what it really always ends up coming down to, is just like, no, he's going to shoot it, and it's going to go in. And
Yeah.
that's, you know what I mean? Like,
He was saying like he'd always come to these games and people would be dogging him, and his main goal was to do so well that they're dogging the guy guarding him.
yeah. And he would flip it on guys so much like that, because he was really one of the better offensive players of his era.
Yeah. He was played for the Catholic Youth Organization basketball at St. Thomas Aquinas Parish on Flatlands. He won the 1974 free throw shooting competition. It was like a national free throw shooting competition.
So he was like the best youth free throw shooter in America, which makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, he was just one of the best as far as free throws once he got to the NBA. He also attended a youth basketball camp hosted by Lou Cartaseca, who was then the head coach at St. John's, and that probably has kind of a big impact on what he does down the road.
Well, they have just a huge relationship throughout his whole life, even so, like, we'll say it, he ends up going to St. John's, but even before he goes there, he's really a huge basketball influence. So it's interesting, because he stays in his life pretty much throughout all of basketball. So
Yeah, and when he gets to high school, he goes to a place called Power Memorial Academy. He's teammates with a future NBA player in Mario Elie,
Yeah.
who won a few NBA titles with the Rockets and Spurs. But his junior year, he wants to go to a better program and play with his friends that he grew up with. So he goes to Xaverian High School.
I was hoping you were picking that one up, but it was just a better high school with a better team, and we see this
More
because
exposure.
more exposure, yes.
Yeah.
And they end up winning the state championship.
Yeah, 1981 Class
yeah.
A state title. Basically, what ends up happening is he wants to stay on the East Coast. The Big East is finally developing itself as a powerhouse for schools. He says he visited a couple of ACC schools, was really intrigued by Duke, and because Mike Krzyzewski was going to start that year for Duke, and he just loved college basketball, was like, oh man, could be really cool. But he decides to stay home and play in Queens for St. John's.
Well, I find this to be interesting because he could have stayed in the Big East in this area, many of New York schools right there, but he picked St. John's, who was not a great basketball program ever.
Yeah, but
So-
they're finally starting to get some good players in their program.
That's the thing is they're like in the past like year or two, they're starting to pick it up. And when they get Mullin, that's like the last piece into making it like a viable kind of program.
That's a centerpiece, and they have Bill Wennington there, and then later on you get Mark Jackson.
Yep.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Mark Jackson card where the Menendez brothers are in the card? They're in the crowd.
And let's go with what we're referencing here. The Menendez brothers literally murdered their parents and then went to a Clippers game, and there's a Mark Jackson card with them in the background because they had bought courtside seats.
It's a collector's item, like an
collector's
O.J.
item.
Simpson 49ers card.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a good one, yeah. So St. John's, Mullin's a starter as a freshman. I mean, he plays and starts all 4 years.
I was going to say,
obviously.
yeah, he's ready right off of the bat. And this is what I feel like those Bronx, like, seriously training camps were putting him into is just like, yeah, I'm going to play college ball. That's not any kind of challenge. You know what I mean? Like, so, yeah, he starts off with 16.6 points in his first freshman year, which is ridiculous. Like, you'll take that from your center, or I mean, from your top senior, you know?
Yeah, and he's playing kind of both shooting guard and small forward because he has this interesting frame. He's 6'6", little north of 200 pounds. So he's like a really big shooting guard who can just fire from anywhere, but he's also big enough to play small forward and also, contribute as far as rebounds and things like that, and assists too. He's a great passer, which is one of the comparisons many had to Larry Bird.
Yep.
But
well, I feel like he plays with what the defense gives him. So if like the shooting guard isn't necessarily tall, he's just going to dominate that shooting guard. And then if they need him on small forward, which you see in the NBA, it actually is so.
it's a perfect fit for him
Yep.
because you're not forcing him to cover quicker shooting guards because maybe a little bit of a step slow, but he's so smart that he puts himself in the right position.
Yep.
And like you said, he takes what the defense gives him. It's a really good quality because he knows how to do everything on a basketball court. Like his basketball IQ is ridiculous.
Yes.
So that's for his freshman season. They make the tournament but lose to Alabama. His sophomore season, they win 28 games and are a number 1 seed.
Yeah.
And Mullin just keeps, like, you just see a steady incline in all of his stats, 19.1 points a game, 3.7 rebounds, and 3.1 assists. But unfortunately, once they get to the tournament, they lose to Georgia in the regional semifinal game. And this was the Georgia team that later went on to the Final Four. And who knows, that would have been a great matchup if they played Phi Slamma Jamma
Yeah.
in that Final Four, because that was the
Definitely.
NC State one. But yeah, it's crazy. 83, 84. He has 22.9 points a game, 4.4 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3.1 steals, which speaks to his defensive prowess,
Yes.
I think. And by this time, I think they have Mark Jackson. And 83, 84, really good team, or a decent team. They're 18 and 12, finished third in the Big East, but they end up losing in the first round of the tournament.
Which is kind of what keeps happening with this team is like they have some pretty good regular seasons and then they really just can't put it together in March.
I think a lot of it is you're playing that grueling, brutal conference schedule in the Big East.
Just going to bring this up. You're not going in 100%. There's no way you're going to have all your players healthy. You're going in with one guy with a broken finger, and it's just
Patrick Ewing might have slapped someone in the face.
Exactly. It's coming out of the Big East, especially back then, was rough. And you saw it with these teams kind of not cruising through March like people thought they would.
It's like, I'm tired. I want to go home now.
Yeah.
But his senior season really puts it all together along with the team. 31-4. They win the Big East, and they make the Final Four that year. And this is an important Final Four, not only for Mullin and St. John's, but the whole conference itself. 3 teams make it from that conference in the Final Four. That'll never be done again.
No.
I mean, maybe in college football it's 3 SEC teams, but not in basketball for any conference. He was in all, so they go to the Final Four, but they end up drawing Georgetown. Villanova gets to draw Memphis State, and so they play Georgetown and Ewing, and they end up getting pretty much shellacked by them.
Yeah, well, Ewing, just so people can have some perspective, he was pretty much unstoppable in college. So you see this Georgetown team just kind of mow them down.
Yeah, but as unstoppable as Ewing was, I did want to bring up, Mullin was a 3-time Big East Player of the Year.
Well, I feel like Mullin was more important to St. John's, if that makes sense. Georgetown had a better all-around team. Even though St. John's had a great team, you see them getting to the Final Four. But just with his points, he had 20 that year.
Yeah.
And he was their all-time points leader. And I just feel like Mullin was...
Wooden Award.
Yeah.
1983 Big East Tournament MVP, which is pretty fantastic. And I did want to bring up in 1984... he was named to the U.S. Olympic basketball team.
Yep.
And this is a team that had, like we said, college players, but this was a team with Michael Jordan and a lot of really good studs.
Well, it was the second to last amateur, and Bobby Knight was coaching it.
Throwing chairs, choking everyone.
Well, I feel like this was kind of a little bit delusional on our part just to send amateurs and be like, oh, they're just going to win, because these guys were the next class of professionals with Bobby Knight, who knew how to coach all of these guys. So they go into this 84 Olympics and end up winning gold.
They just mow everyone down there too. I mean, it's not even particularly close. And 88 they have a good amateur team, but not to that. Mitch Richmond, David Robinson, Hall of Fame, but they're not that star quality in the aggregate. You know what I mean? But goes into the 85 NBA draft, projected to be a lottery pick, obviously. This was the draft, Chris, where the Atlanta Hawks went unsuccessfully to the Bone Zone.
Oh, yes.
Arvydas Sabonis.
The Bone Zone.
Going to the Bone Zone.
Looking at this draft, and back in the NBA in this era, was such a tall man-centric league that literally the first 6 picks were all big men.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a copycat league.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that it was, back in those days. And Mullin ends up slipping a bit, and he slips to number 7 overall, which nothing to sneeze at. But he's not particularly happy about where he goes.
No, he really wanted to play on the East Coast. He really wanted to, let's not,
Well, he wants to play for the Knicks.
He wanted to play in Madison Square Garden. That's was his dream growing up.
And he got to do it in the Big East tourney, which is, is great. But you want to play for your childhood team. Everybody does,
That's just the way it goes. He didn't want to play for the Nets. Let's just make that clear.
Yeah.
But he ends up getting drafted by Golden State, who just was not a franchise that I feel like many players wanted to go to.
They had kind of about a decade leading up to that of crappiness, is the nicest way to put it.
And they weren't necessarily on an upward trajectory. So it wasn't hey, we're getting stuff going here. It was we're picking you up. And it was okay.
Welcome. It's like that scene in Wayne's World. Imagine being magically whisked away to Oakland. We're in Oakland.
Just kind of standing there.
Yeah. Oh, God. Anyway, he gets there, and they're a terrible team. He had talked about earlier in practice, the veterans were mad at him for making him look bad. And while all of this is going on, he's very homesick, and he's missing his girlfriend, future wife, immensely back in New York. And his family, he was super tight with his family. Beer softball leagues, hanging out, playing basketball. But yeah, he's 85, 86, 14 points a game, 2.1 rebounds, 1.9 assists per game in 50 games that he played. Unfortunately, the team is god awful.
Well, I want to point this out because you kind of were talking about how the team really and him didn't mesh at all. The franchise was really backing their veteran point guard at that time, Sleepy Floyd.
Yeah, Sleepy Floyd.
And he was really at the decline. And that's what Mullin...
that guy played in the 60s.
Yeah, no, that's what Mullin was saying. It was just like this old era needs to go kind of thing. And you can kind of see in these first couple of seasons, he really struggles with NBA life.
They probably put better teams on the court his last 2 years at St. John's.
No, seriously. Like they were not viable whatsoever. And not only not viable, they weren't looking to the future like, hey, we need to get back behind Chris. He's going to be our next guy. They were like, man, Sleepy's looking good for 42. Am I right?
Yeah, right.
It's like, Jesus Christ.
He looks sleepy because he's old. Anyway, that season though, Mullin 15.1 points a game, 3.2 rebounds, 2.1 assists. But the team somehow makes the playoffs.
Yeah,
they somehow squeak into the playoffs, and they end up losing to the Jazz in 5 games. Mm-hmm.
And then I want to say this because he's playing shooting guard at this point.
No, they beat the Jazz 3-2, and then they lose to the Lakers 4-1 in 5 games in the second round.
All right.
Yeah. But yeah, they moved him from shooting guard.
Well, no, he comes in as shooting guard, and then Don Nelson comes in.
Yeah, and Don Nelson is a no-nonsense individual as a coach. Very successful NBA coach, former championship player, but he does rub people the wrong way.
And we'll see that in a couple of years.
Yeah, but he also has the best intentions for his players at heart with something that he does with Mullin and kind of a personal issue that he's struggling with.
Well, this is something that for all of like his career when Chris was coming through, people were talking about he was always like the first guy in the gym, the last guy to leave. He was always completely dedicated. When he gets into the NBA, he's missing his family. He's moved out to Oakland, which might be a party town. I don't know.
I'm sure there's a lot of fun things to do there.
He definitely said for the first time in his life, he decided to take basketball and put it as like a number 2 or even a number 3
as a hobby.
As
it's
a hobby,
his life.
Hobby. But he said it was getting so bad that he was literally finding he was like out of shape, which is kind of crazy to say. But he was like, yeah, like I would come back from the off season and I would be like, man, I am winded.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy because he was always just like that gym rat that was just always just ready to shoot a million shots. So like, this is when we see Don Nelson come in as the coach and be like, that's not okay.
Yeah, and I mean, 87, 88, he has a good season by anyone's standards, 20.2 points a game, 3.4 rebounds, 4.8 assists. But this is kind of the moment where everything's out of the box and you find out he is a highly functional alcoholic. And the Warriors and Don Nelson are they want him to get help, obviously, and bring him back, but they want him to get help.
Well, it all comes to a head because I think he misses practice because he was so drunk. They say, hey, you need to get help. And then
December 10th, 1987.
And then they suspend him and let him go to rehab, essentially, which is, I mean, it pretty much changes his life. And it made him and this is, I bet, what the conversation kind of was like, do you want to be a good player? Because you're a good player. Or do you want to be a great player?
Yeah.
Because that's really what was holding him back was this kind of transition into the NBA. And I feel like as soon as Don came in, he was just like, no. We're putting Sleepy to sleep. And we're going to put you as our main guy. Please, I'm putting you to small forward. That was the other thing that he did was he switches him to small forward and almost gives him more responsibility on this offensive end.
Which works very well for them.
All of everything that Don Nelson does for this kind of thing, which I feel like this is why people talk shit on these franchises, is like, this was going on for a couple of years and nobody says shit. And then Don Nelson comes in and he's just like, hold on, guys. What's happening here?
What the fuck are you people doing? Yes. Serenity now.
So, and this is when the Warriors become a pretty good team because they start bringing in good players.
Start adding players over the next few years like Tim Hardaway, point guard, Mitch Richmond shooting, run TMC.
Oh, I love that.
This is this kind of era starting of Warriors basketball.
We don't get these names anymore.
No,
I've
noticed
brought
this up before.
Yeah.
They don't make nicknames like they used to anymore.
No.
It's not... they're not fun or catchy or just overall badass.
Yeah,
you
no,
know?
seriously, because Run TMC for 2 or 3 years was really a great
They were like the
backcourt.
highest scoring team in the NBA. It's like almost what the Warriors later became with the Splash Brothers.
Well, this is what people were saying was just like they'd be viable in the NBA now. And that's what they were saying about Chris Mullin was just like he almost missed out on this
He would be
absolutely
dropping 30 a game in today's NBA.
the huge shoot, like literally he would be open for 3 like 50% of the time.
and his
which
passing would be
Oh
so
my-
much more useful. I mean, not that it wasn't then, but I mean, it would just be ridiculous.
Well,
now.
the defense was just better then. That's the only
Yeah.
thing. It was a way hard-nosed league, like the like we were saying, coming out of the Big East. Like even in college, it was just that much rougher. So yeah, he is a guy that might have been better in today's era, but man, he was still absolutely wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
So Run TMC starts to go.
88-89. They have a career. He has a career high 26.5 points, 5.9 rebounds, 5.1 assists, and 2.1 steals. And this was the first of his 5 straight All-Star games, and I think 5 years in a row where he averaged over 25 a game.
Yep.
And so he's sober, he's excited, the players don't suck around him. Like, what more could you ask for? All NBA second team. And then they acquired, and he had 29.4 points per game in the postseason. Obviously, you're going to start seeing these Warriors teams now making the playoffs, but they're really not going anywhere beyond the first or second round.
I did see a great quote from Tim Hardaway when he was talking about Chris Mullin. He was just like, when I drive and I kick it out, and like in the basketball terms, we say, oh, that's a layup.
Yeah.
And we say it for when people have a layup. And he was just like, but I say it when Chris has an open shot. And he was just talking about that, how like, he was just like, no, I know I'm going to kick it. And if he's open, I'm just like, that's a layup.
Him and Richmond were talking about how smart he was. Like, they'd start the fast break, and somehow Mullin would be almost under the opposite basket.
Yeah.
He just kind of knew what to do in those instances. But 89, 90. The team led the NBA in scoring. They have Hardaway, Richmond, everything. 25.1 points a game, 5.9 rebounds, 4.1 assists. And then in 90-91, Mullin leads the league in minutes per game.
Oh, yeah.
So his body's kind of back now from, that, alcohol, last in the gym, first to leave type of attitude.
Yeah, he was just out of shape. That's what he was saying, especially for an NBA player, which you have to be in pristine shape. And this is him like really becoming his best player.
Yeah, and he's just a sniper. He's just a freaking assassin from deep, and just knows how to get open, knows how to defend guys at the small forward position. Just a really good player. 90-91, again, 25 a game. 91-92, another 25 points per game. They beat the Spurs in the playoffs, but then they meet the Lakers, which, for all intents and purposes, isn't a good thing. But he's NBA first team that year, so that's pretty impressive. Speaking of 1992, do you want to get into what he was a part of that offseason, that summer?
Well, and he's one of the guys that kind of gets left off of this list of the dream team because there were so many great guys. And if you would say like, oh, he's probably like the 12th guy on that team or the 11th, you know what I mean? But he still was without a doubt one of the best guys. And I saw a great quote that said, when Mullin was on the floor with us, it spread the game so much that we could just attack the rim because everyone's just like, oh shit, we can't leave him open.
Oh yeah, when they're picking the team, Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan have talked about just how phenomenal this guy was. They're like, we're not leaving him off the team.
Jordan thought he was absolutely fantastic.
You go look at a dream team picture, and if you don't know who Chris Mullin is or what he looks like, he's the guy with the awesome crew cut.
I wanted to bring this up right now because even in this era, it's such a weird ass haircut. Like for a white guy.
90s, it's like Johnny Unitas called. He wants his haircut back.
It was awesome because also at St. John's he kind of had a normal.
He had a normal haircut at St. John's,
and then he goes to Golden State and he's like, "I'm changing everything." And he I'll tell you what, he has an image and a look that will like you could draw like the outline of him and you'd be like, "Oh, that's Chris Mullin."
Oh yeah, no,
so like that
very recognizable.
Yeah, so, which is actually pretty cool. But I'm just saying it's kind of a silly haircut in that era. It's very
It's awkward looking.
Awkward.
It's as
Yeah.
awkward as my mustache looks right now.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful.
But 92, 93, he injures tore a ligament in his right thumb, which limited him to only 46 games. But he did average over 25. They end up getting swept in the first round of the playoffs. No, that was the following season. But the problem is, Warriors front office, as good as they were doing, they make a very bad trade.
Yeah, they decide to break up Run TMC.
During this part, they trade Mitch Richmond to, I believe, Sacramento. Yeah, that's where
I think
he
so,
went.
yeah.
For Billy Owens, who could have been an amazing inside presence in the NBA and showed flashes, but his career just never ended up materializing, and kind of that team chemistry broke up.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, Hardaway is still there. It's kind of like, I don't know. And 93, 94, what happens, they really kind of screw over their franchise when in the draft they end up having the 4th selection. This was the draft where the Magic had the lowest odds of getting the number 1 pick, but still get it.
Yeah.
And they draft Chris Webber. But they draft Chris Webber with no intention of keeping Chris Webber because apparently, I've heard this story while filming the movie Blue Chips with Nick Nolte.
Yeah. And Shaq.
Shaq is in it. One of the college players who is Shaq's teammates is Penny Hardaway.
Yeah.
And Penny Hardaway got to play a lot of basketball with Shaq during the filming, and he went to the front office and said, "You have to get this guy." He's the base. He didn't say it then, but like a lot of people talked about Penny being the new Magic Johnson, and he had like a 5-year window in there where he played up to that standard.
That's true.
But instead of keeping Hardaway, who they drafted 4, which would have been awesome to have him inserted, it would, in my opinion, if he had stayed healthy, would have been a better player than Mitch Richmond down the line. Granted, at a different position, but they trade all of this draft capital to Orlando for Webber, and Webber gets there, and him and Nelson butt heads
Right away.
Super talented. I think we did an episode on a guy. He was the only rookie outside of Chris Webber to leave the team after his rookie year.
Oh,
Forget
yeah.
who it was, but I'll have to look back on that. But anyway, 93, 94, Mullin averages 16.8 points a game, 5.6 rebounds, 5.1 assists, but they end up getting swept in the playoffs. And Webber's gone along with all of the building block draft picks that you would probably need to rebuild this thing.
So this is what is so sad is they literally shoot themselves in the foot, give away one of the best guards in this next like 2 or 3 years, and have nothing left.
You have nothing to show for even keeping Webber because you didn't end up doing that.
And unfortunately, the guys that they do have are starting to pick up a bunch of injuries.
Yeah.
Mullin's starting to get injured at this point.
Only 23 games in 94, 95. 95, 96, only 13.3 points a game. And by this point, Hardaway is gone.
Yeah.
Your team is bereft of basically all the talent you once had. And Mullin is getting up there in years. He's entering about year 10 of his career. So, you got to have something to show for it.
And he's entering year 10 of his career as like the number 1 guy. That's the other thing. So he's constantly, like we said, he had number 1 in minutes 1 year. So like he is definitely putting time in on the court, and it's starting to show.
Yeah, in 96, 97, he had a career high in field goal percentage, so he can still ball at 55.3%. Averages just under 14.5 points a game. But after that season, the Warriors are in dire straits, and they end up trading Chris Mullin to a contending team.
Trade him to the Pacers.
There was a good quote from a San Francisco sports writer, a Bay Area sports writer, who said, "There should be a good soldier clause in every player's contract." Like, he basically went into how he lays himself out on the line for a team that wins 30 games, that like, we're going to do right by you by trading you to an up-and-coming Pacers team. And in 97, 98, the Pacers are really good, and Mullin has a really good season with them.
Well, this is Miller. This is Cheryl Miller out on the court. This is Rick Schmitz too, right? The tall white
Rick
boy.
Schmitz is there.
Yeah.
The Dutchman. Yeah.
The Dutchman.
The Davis boys. And then
I remember seeing him for the first time, and I was like, oh, that guy's from Indiana. And they're just like, no, he's from Holland. I'm just like,
Yeah, the Netherlands are like the Indiana of Europe. Only with more red light stuff.
I like that.
Yeah, there you go. See, that's why he always ends up on the Pacers.
Yes.
Oh, God. He led the league in free throw percentage, 93.9, and 11.3 points per game.
Yeah.
Which, for a 34, 35-year-old guy, is pretty damn impressive.
Started all 82 games his first season with the Pacers.
And they're really good. I think they had the 2 or the 3 seed in the East that year, and they roll all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. And
who do they run into?
They run into. My friend brought this up, and it's a really great point. When you look at that 92 Dream Team, there are probably like 7 guys that Jordan personally denied NBA championships only by his presence. Stockton and Malone, Mullin, like just across that spectrum of the team, Jordan probably screwed so many of them just because Michael Jordan, But
well, I saw this was kind of interesting. This was the only team that took the Bulls to 7 games.
And they could have won that game 7.
Yep.
And they likely end up beating the Jazz in the next series, which is kind of sad. But 98-99, luckily for them, they have a really great team still. And Mullin kind of starts ceding some playing time to Jalen Rose.
Which makes sense. I'll be honest. It makes sense. Jalen Rose, great player, and he was just
younger.
Younger, a better defensive small forward.
Yeah.
And it just made sense. But this was the other thing that I was thinking of was just like he could really put in whoever he wants for the situation at small forward. And that's why this Pacers team, it was so good.
And they're good, and they go, I think, the 2 seed in that lockout year, and they go all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. And everyone I remember is super excited because you could have had the first all-ABA finals between the Pacers and the Spurs, but the Knicks, who are the 8th seed, I still don't know how they did that. Without Patrick Ewing, and, I mean, granted, Latrell Sprewell choking his coach had an incredible postseason and season, along with Grandmama.
But they really should not have beaten the Pacers in this. It's one of those upsets that you're just like, play that again like 8 times.
Finally
it's not gonna...
getting revenge on Cheryl.
Yeah.
Spike Lee, no. In 2000, 2001, in 99, 2000, bench guy again, only 5.1 points a game. And then in 2000, 2001, he goes to the Warriors. For one season when they're particularly terrible.
Well, this is something that I do love when guys are like, hey, I'm about to retire. I want to retire as a Warrior. That's kind of like what happened because he was done.
Yeah, he played 20 games that year.
Yeah.
But his final stats, I did want to bring this up. He is in the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
2 times, actually, because I guess when they inducted the Dream Team, that was a separate entity.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so every guy on that
sense.
team who's in the Hall of Fame is in there twice, which I think is pretty cool.
I do like that.
Yeah, they gave them their own thing, which I think is important, too, to kind of illustrate to everybody
how special that was.
Basketball will never again be this awesome,
But
18.2 points a game, 4.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 2 gold medals, 5-time All-Star, 2010, 2011, both times he's inducted, and his number was retired by St. John's.
Yeah.
Which, obviously, is one of the program's all-time best. Outside of Meta World Peace, who we discussed at one point. He's a St. John's alum.
And Mark Jackson. I think those are the 3 that really stand out. But, best haircut of his era.
Yeah. Special assistant for the Warriors after his career in 2004. Lasted about 5 years. And then he was an advisor for the Kings in 2013. But now he's kind of back in the front office types of roles, but was a coach for St. John's. He was a head coach from 2015 to 2019 and got him into the tournament one year. But after one of his brothers died and the team was kind of middling, he decided to call it quits after the 2019 season. So
yeah, we'll see because I feel like more might be in store for him. So we'll see. It goes into coaching, commentating, whatever, haircutting. That's all.
Guy's
I'm
a basketball lifer and a barber. But no, Chris Mullin, the lefty assassin.